السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أو كانت المخالفة بإبداله الراوي ولا مرجح لإحدى الروايتين على الأخرى فهذا هو المضطرب، وهو يقع في الإسناد غالبا وقد يقع في المتن، لكن قل أن يحكم المحدث على الحديث باضطراب بالنسبة إلى اختلاف في المتن دون الإسناد، وقد يقع الإبدال عمدا لمن يراد اختبار حفظه امتحانا من فاعله كما وقع للبخاري والعقيلي وغيرهما. Ibn Hajar rahmallah moves on to discuss yet another category of mukhalafa. So, we are still on the seventh type of asbab al-ta'n. The seventh type is mukhalafa, but now this here is a point D. So point D of the seventh type. The seventh point is mukhalafa, and under mukhalafa we have different types. So we first said mudraj, then maqloob, then mazid fi muttasil al-asanid, and now we come to muḍṭarib. So muḍṭarib refers to differences which cannot be solved. This here is the simple meaning. That a narration is transmitted from one narrator in different ways. So he sometimes quotes a chain in one way, and then at times he quotes that same chain in a very different way. Now one student heard the first chain from him, and another student heard the second chain from him. There is no way for us now to decide whose chain we should give preference to, because both of these students are equal, which makes us understand that it's actually the teacher, that one individual who differed, and it's not his students who are making the mistake. So two students are citing from the same sheikh with the same chain, but one quotes the sanad in one way and the other quotes it in a different way, and it is impossible to determine who narrated it accurately. So this is how it happens in the sanad, and then it can also happen in the text, that they are transmitting the same text from the same sheikh and with the same sanad, but they differ in the words and then in the meaning. So the more important point is in the meaning of the narration. The whole meaning of the narration changed, because you can say one is making riwayah bil ma'na. So here they are narrating the same text, but the whole meaning is being changed, and there is no way to give preference to one over the other. So like we said, that both of them are equal in status, and or maybe if it's more than two, then the amount of narrators transmitting the one are equal to the amount who are transmitting the other. So you have three students narrating it in one way, and then three students narrating it in another way, and we cannot give preference. This here is called muḍṭarib. It's with a kasra bi kasra ra. Mullah al-Qari rahmallah mentions fa'ilun min iḍṭaraba. It's the fa'il of the word iḍṭaraba. From a linguistic point, the lughi meaning iḍṭirab, it is derived from the word daraba yazribu. So daraba yazribu means to place one thing on another thing. Alama Raghib Isbahani, he says, الضرب إيقاع شيء على شيء. That when you put one thing on another thing, and this is how you get the meaning of hitting, because it means you are actually like when you hit, if you hit with your hands, and then say you hit another person on his hand, then you are putting it, although you are putting it with force. And he mentions that you can get different strength of hitting. يتصور اختلاف الضرب. So كضرب الشيء باليد, then there's a different force. والعصا, there's a different force. والسيف, there's a different force. So these are the root words, and from there the word اضطراب is derived. In Lisan al-Arab you find that there's Ibn Manzur rahmallah, he gives the different ways in which the word اضطراب could be used, but they all have the common meaning of اختلال and fasad al-daman or haraka. So they have these meanings of movement or difference or variance or uneasiness. So he explains, وَالْمَوْجُ يَضْطَرِبْ يَضْرِبُ بَعْضُ بَعْضًا. So all these kind of meanings. So these are with regards to the lugwi meaning. Now coming to the technical meaning. So look at that Ibn Hajar rahmallah says. He says, أو إن كانت المخالفة بإبداله أي الراوي. So now take note that he put a alif lam on the word rawi. But if you look at it, it's a very simple statement, which is very straightforward and easy to understand, that it means there is contradiction where one narrator swaps and changes the sanad. So this is simple to understand. One person is sometimes narrating it in one way and sometimes narrating it in another way. So from this you can understand that if there is difference anywhere in the sanad, so it means from the sheikh right up until the sahabi, anywhere in the sanad if there is a difference, then that narration will be called muḍṭarib. Now if you don't want to get tangled up in a big confusion, then just understand the lesson until here, that whenever there is confusion in one narration which is transmitted with one sanad, then it will be called muḍṭarib. So if you find Imam Darqutni rahimahullah or Imam Tahawi rahimahullah, you'll see towards the end of this chapter he mentions about mu'allal. And we done it in the lessons of Muqaddamah ibn Salah as well, that it's actually both the same, mu'allal and muḍṭarib. So that's why you go to the books of ilal, and likewise Imam Tahawi rahmallah, he very frequently he points out istirab. So when they mention this istirab on a narration, then you can simply understand that there is some confusion somewhere along in the chain, higher up. So it's not necessarily Imam Darqutni's teacher or Imam Tahawi's teacher, rather 5 links up there could be some confusion, and therefore they are saying there's istirab, and they will even point out the istirab. So basically, if you look at it like this here, then it just refers to any changing which takes place at some place in the sanad. Now, in light of that, go to the definition which Shaykh Nuruddin gives here in the footnotes. So he says, هو الحديث الذي يروى من قبل راو واحد أو أكثر على أوجه مختلفة متساوية لا مرجح بينهما ولا يمكن الجمع. That one narration which is transmitted by one person, but there is difference in the chain. So some will narrate him quoting it in a different way, and others would quote him narrating it in a different way. But now commentators then specified this here. For example, Alama Qasim rahmallah in Al-Qawl al-Mubtakar, he said that بإبدال الشيخ المروي عنه أي بأن يروي اثنان حديثا فيرويه أحدهما عن شيخ والآخر عن آخر ويتفقا فيما بعد ذلك الشيخ. So they focusing on the alif lam on the word rawi. That he's saying بإبداله بإبدال الراوي with the alif lam. And because of that alif lam, so that means it has to be known. It is now ma'rifah, it is no more nakira. So they started now to say that it refers to when the sheikh differs. So you have one person quoting it from one sheikh and another person quoting it from another sheikh. Alama Qurani, he explains, bi'ibdali. Now when you're taking this meaning of bi'ibdalihi, a sheikh, so that means it's min idafati al-masdar ila al-fa'il. So now the masdar, you are linking it to the fa'il, wa ilayhi al-ishara bi qawlihi al-rawi. And then the maf'ul is hidden, bi'ibdali al-rawi shaykhahu. So this is what the meaning will be, that when you have one person transmitting from one sheikh, but another person is transmitting it from another sheikh. So basically, if taking this meaning is now, we are going right up in the sanad. We are going to that link where there is the difference, and we have now one person narrating it from one sheikh and another person narrating it from another sheikh. So this here is just an example, but in this specific way, when only the teachers differ, then it is very simple to say that both teachers heard it from the link above. So that means the teacher's teacher, the grand teacher, so to say, the grandfather, the grand teacher, he had maybe 2 students, and the one student is hearing it from his one student, and another student is hearing it from his other student. So now if you have to look at this explanation which Alama Qurani and Alama Qasim rahimahullah are giving, then leave alone being weak, all of this here will fall under the category of mutaba'at. So now you will actually have to say that it's not only strong, the one narration is strengthening the other. That this teacher, the teacher's teacher, had 2 students, and there's mutaba'at now. So instead of all of this here, it's easier to understand it as muḍṭarib when you are looking few links lower in the sanad. So when you are looking, you have this whole chain above you, and now you find that the students of one person is narrating it differently, and others are narrating it. So we are looking at it from a lower point, looking higher up in the sanad, and then we find, so basically, if you take the scholar who's grading it as istirab, like like the examples I gave you is Imam Darqutni, and you know when Imam Darqutni rahmallah loved. So his teacher is the same, his teacher's teacher is narrating it the same, his teacher's teacher's teacher, all is just one sanad. But now as he's going higher up in the sanad, he finds that there is a digression. Now higher up in the sanad, one person is transmitting it from one person and another is transmitting it from a different person, and then they are both narrating it from the same person higher. And then the sanad is again the same. So looking at it like this from lower links, it becomes more easier to understand. And therefore, it would have been better for the Musannif rahimahullah to drop off the alif lam. And therefore, in Yaqit wa Durar, walau qala al-mu'allif ay bi ibdali rawin, without the alif lam, mentioning it as a nakira, it would have been better. So like I said, it's just subtle points that if you don't understand it, it's fine. And therefore, the definition which Allama Ibn Salah rahmallah gave is actually more simple and easier to understand. Remember that Ibn Hajar rahmallah, he had the book of Ibn Salah, and you know how he praised the book of Allama Ibn Salah rahmallah. So Allama Ibn Salah rahmallah said, Al-Muḍṭarib min al-Ḥadīth huwa alladhī tukhtalafu ar-riwāyatu fīhi. Simple. That the way the hadith is being transmitted is very different. فيرويه بعضهم على وجه وبعضهم على وجه آخر مخالف له. He's saying that some are narrating it in one way and others are narrating it in a different way. But like if you go into that link of only the narrators of their teacher, then you can say there's mutaba'at. So it becomes very difficult. So rather you look at it from a lower point in the sanad, and that is why you find that it's more latter-day scholars who are going to be calling narrations as Muḍṭarib. So this here is just like, now when you're examining the usage, then you come up with all of these kind of points. If you don't ever look at how scholars use the term, then you don't even think that of this whole explanation which is being given. Nevertheless, then Allama Ibn Salah rahmallah, like as Ibn Hajar rahmallah is mentioning here, that it's all when وَلَا مُرَجِّحَ لِإِحْدَى الرِّوَايَتَيْنِ عَلَى الْأُخْرَى. So Allama Ibn Salah said, إِذَا تَسَاوَتَ الرِّوَايَتَانِ. This here is a very essential and very important clause, that you can't give preference to one chain over the other. So what's happening is that you have to be we have to omit both of these chains. We cannot use anyone. We have to disregard both of them. Why? Because if you can give preference to the one over the other, then the one which you are giving preference to will be called mahfuz, and the other one will be called shadh. أما إن ترجحت إحداهما بأن يكون راويهما أحفظ أو أكثر صحبة للمروي أو غير ذلك فالحكم للراجح. You give preference and you practice upon the one which you are preferring. ولا يكون حينئذ مضطربا, and then its no more will be called as مضطرب. So that is what Allama Munawi rahmallah also says, بل هي شاذة أو منكر على ما مر. That if you're giving preference to the one, you can practice on the one, and the other you regard it as shaz or you regard it as a munkar. So you remember the chapter of shaz and mahfuz, that two reliable narrators contradict one another, but you are able to give preference to the one narration. So in this case, they are contradicting, but you can see there is no way, la murajjiha, there is no way that you can give preference to the one over the other. And therefore, we cannot then practice on either of these narrations. وَيَلْزِمُ مِنْهُ يَكُونَ الْحَدِيثُ ضَعِيفًا. And that's what caused both the narrations to be considered as weak and therefore discarded. لِشْعَرِي بِأَنْ لَمْ يَضْبُطْ عَلَى مَا ذَكَرَهُ الْجَزَرِ. That their teacher made the mistake, and the teacher didn't remember the sanad correctly, and therefore we will say that we cannot practice. So now it all makes sense. Now, explaining how do you give preference to one narration over the other, there are so many different ways, just that you get an idea. Mullah al-Qari is saying here that you look, maybe the one has a better memory than the other, or the one spent more time in the company of the sheikh, لا سيما إن كان ولده, if it is his own son, أو قريبه أو مولاه, maybe it's it's a slave of his who got freed, أو بلديه, or maybe they live in the same street, أو غير ذلك من وجوه الترجيح المعتمد. Likewise, you look at the fact, were both of them of the same age. Maybe the one was a small child and the other one was baligh when they heard this, the narration. أو سماعه من لفظ شيخه. In all of these cases, when you can give preference, looking at so many different factors, then you will give preference to the one over the other, and you will say that there is no اضطراب. Because when it comes to reliable narrators, then as much as possible you want to try to see how you can consider the narrations and how you can practice on the narrations. It's better rather than totally discarding and throwing away the narration, if you can accept that narration. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentioned this. Now he did not give any example. So there is something which I wanted to point out from the example which the commentators like Mullah al-Qari and Alama al-Qani and Alama Munawi, likewise Alama Wajiuddin, all of them, they gave the same example. And in fact, if you look in the footnotes, Sheikh Nuruddin, it also gives this same example, And this here is from, we discussed it in Muqaddamah Ibn Salah. So now we're going into all this fine stuff, and I hope all of these intricacies do not become too boring for you, or it's not making a simple thing very confusing and very difficult. I told you long ago that the objective of this kitab is to sharpen your mind. So there are different ways you can teach a kitab. One is you just open a commentary, whatever the commentator said, come and present it to you. But alhamdulillah, all of you have outstanding isti'adad, and that is why I feel confident to mention all of these delicate points. But if it's causing you to lose focus, then let me know and I won't mention all of these kind of points. So the example which they gave is the same one which we discussed in lesson 156, in the lessons of Muqaddamah Ibn Salah. So you can go through that, you can refer to all of that explanation for full, for a lot of details. But here I want to highlight another point. So the example they're giving is the narration which comes in Sunan Abi Dawud and in Sunan Ibn Majah. So it comes, إِذَا صَلَّى أَحَدُكُمْ فَلْيَجْعَلْ تِلْقَى وَجْهِهِ شَيْئًا. So discussing the sanad of the siyam, Alama Munawi is saying, فَقَدْ اخْتُلِفَ فِيهِ عَلَى إِسْمَاعِيلٍ ورواه بشر بن المفضل وغيره هكذا ورواه سفيان الثوري عنه عن أبي عمرو بن حريث عن أبيه عن أبي هريرة. In lesson 156 we explain all the other istirab, but here we're focusing on this one because look, Alama Munawi is only mentioning this as the example, that some Bishr ibn al-Mufaddal is mentioning the name in one way, and then you have Sufyan Thawri rahimullah mentioning the name in another way. There is other istirab as well, but here only focusing and mentioning this as an example. So basically, there are some students, they mentioned the teacher of Ismail ibn Umayyah. So Sufyan Thawri quoted it as Abu Amr ibn Harith. Abu Amr ibn Hurayth, this is how he quoted it. Other students like Bishr ibn al-Mufaddal and Rawd ibn al-Qasim, Mullah al-Qari mentions these two names in his commentary. Alama ibn Salah also added Wahib ibn Khalid and Abdul Warith, and then we quoted there were so many others as well. They quoted as they quote the teacher of Ismail as Amr ibn Muhammad ibn Hurayth. So قد اختلف فيها على إسماعيل اختلافا كثيرا فرواه بشر بن المفضل وروح بن القاسم بن إسماعيل هكذا. They are narrating it in one way. They are saying Amr ibn Muhammad ibn Hurayth. So Amr ibn Muhammad ibn Hurayth. But then Sufyan is saying it Abu Amr ibn Hurayth. This is how he is narrating it. So in Tahdhib al-Kamal it comes إنه من إسماعيل ibn Umayyah. So you have this one person, Ismail ibn Umayyah. So at times when he was narrating the sanad, he said it عن أبي محمد ibn Amr ibn Hurayth. At other times he said عن أبي Amr ibn Muhammad. So instead of putting the word Muhammad, he put instead of putting Amr first, he put Muhammad first. So you can see at times this is how he is changing it. And then at times he said عن أبي Amr ibn Hurayth. So all of these are different ways he changed it. Now until here, based on what we discussed 2 lessons back in lesson 86, would Ibn Hajar rahmallah regard this as Muḍṭarib, or would he regard it as maqlub? So there you can see 2 lessons back we said that أو إن كانت المخالفة بتقديم أو تأخير أي في الأسماء. He mentioned في الأسماء كمرة بن كعب وكعب بن مرة. And the point which I highlighted in that lesson is that the example which he's giving is, and we clearly know that he is differing with those who came before him. He is quoting one person. Murrah ibn Ka'b and Ka'b ibn Murrah is one and the same person. So here, when Ismail ibn Umayyah is differing with one person, you can very easily understand that that will actually fall under what Ibn Hajar rahmallah explained and defined as maqlub. Especially since Allama Munawi rahmallah is giving this as the only example, it would not be correct to give this as an example of istirab. Now you might think that surely Allama Munawi rahmallah would have understood this text better than us. So therefore, if he is saying that it's muḍṭarib, then definitely it is muḍṭarib. His example will be valid. So no doubt he will understand the text better than us. But Ibn Hajar rahmallah will understand what he intended better than Allama Munawi rahmallah. And we find that Ibn Hajar rahmallah himself in his nukat, because we told you that this here comes in Ibn Salah. So he mentions, he said, take note of another point. ذلك أن جميع من رواه عن إسماعيل بن أمية أن هذا الرجل. So now this person who sometimes is being called Abu Muhammad ibn Amr, and sometimes is being called Abu Amr ibn Muhammad, and at times is called Abu Amr ibn Hurayth, is one person. He's saying إنما وقع الاختلاف بينهم في اسمه أو كنيته. They are all the differences is coming on his name and on his kunya. وإذا تحقق الأمر لم يكن فيه حقيقة الاضطراب. So Ibn Hajar rahmallah is saying that then there is no اضطراب in here. Why? لأن الاضطراب هو الاختلاف الذي يؤثر قدحا ورأسا. And later on he also said in his nukat, فما يضره مع ذلك لا ينضبط اسمه إذا عرفت ذاته والله تعالى أعلم. So you can see Ibn Hajar rahmallah does not agree with this example which Ibn Salah gave. Yet the commentators are coming and giving the same example here, when Ibn Hajar rahmallah is clearly mentioning that there is no istirab. So understand it in this way. Ibn Hajar did not mention an example. But assuming if he had to give an example, would he have given this example? Because the commentators, they are the wakil, they are the representative or the ambassador of Ibn Hajar. They have to explain to you what Ibn Hajar understood and what Ibn Hajar is trying to convey. So would Ibn Hajar mention this example which his commentators are mentioning? Would they give the same example? So no, they wouldn't. Ibn Hajar would never. He's mentioning it in his nukat that he doesn't see any problem. He doesn't consider it as istirab. We mentioned that it's actually considered as a maqlub. And therefore, you see, Allama Munawi rahmallah himself, he's saying with regards to the teacher of Ibn Hajar, وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ الْإِرَاقِيَّ فِي أَلْفِيَّتِهِ قَدْ جَعَلَ جَمِيعَ ذَلِكَ مِنْ أَقْسَامِ الْمَقْلُوبِ. That Allama Iraqi puts most of this. So from here you can also see that maqlub and istirab is used interchangeably. Some would consider it a narration as maqlub, and some will consider as muḍṭarib. And there's another point also here towards the end, maybe we're going to get to discuss it in the next lesson. As you can see the example that وَقَدْ يَقَعُ الْإِبْدَالُ عَمْدًا لِمَنْ يُرَادُ اخْتِبَارُ حِفْظِهِ. That Ibn Salah mentioned it under maqlub. Ibn Hajar rahmallah is mentioning it here under istirab. And all of this here then also further shows us that although maqlub and istirab is generally regarded as weak, there are times when it will be regarded as authentic. So Allama Munawi rahmallah says, وَعْلَمْ أَنَّ الْإِضْطِرَابَ يُوجِبُ ضَعْفَ الْحَدِيثِ الْإِشْعَارِ بِعَدَمِ الضَّبْطِ الَّذِي وَشَرْطُ الصِّحَّةِ وَالْحَسَنِ. That it's very obvious that this teacher, he did not remember, because sometimes he's narrating it in one way, at other times he's narrating it in a different way. So he did not accurately remember. If he does it once or twice, then you can say that, okay, he made a mistake. But if it starts to do it frequently, then he loses his reliability. So now you can see this very same narration. Ibn Hajar rahmallah is mentioning that there's no istirab in it, but he would definitely put it under the category of maqlub. If he had to give an example, then he would have given, especially for qalb in the sanad, then he would have given this as an example for it, because you can see it, one person's name which is being altered. But this very same narration, when he mentioned it in Bulugh al-Maram, then he quoted this here, and at the end he said, وَلَمْ يُصِبْ مَنْ زَعَمَ أَنَّهُ مُضْطَرِبٌ, that those who regarded it and said it is istirab, they are not correct. بَلْ هُوَ حَسَنٌ. So therefore it's incorrect to give that. Although now there is other ways in which istirab features in the same narration, like I said, that you can go and check in that lesson of Muqaddamah ibn Salah. Mullah al-Qari says, وَفِيهِ مِنَ الْإِضْطِرَابِ أَكْثَرُ مِنْ هَذَا. There is much istirab in there. But now, not to confuse those of you who are doing the kitab for the first time, so we rather quote another simple and straightforward example. And that is the famous example which is given. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu said, Ya Rasulullah, raka shibta, I see that your hair is starting to turn white. So Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam responded by saying, Shayyabatni hud wa akhawatuha. So Imam Darqutni rahmallah, he explains that how the sanad, there's istirab in the sanad. So he says that firstly, it's only narrated via Abu Ishaq. Now it's narrated in 10 different ways from him. So some narrated it that he's quoting a sahabi's name. Others are quoting it that no, he's quoting it as mursalan. That is the tabi'i to Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Then some of them are saying that he's narrating it from Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. Others are saying no, he's narrating it that it's actually the person who asked it was Sa'id radiallahu anhu. Others are saying no, it's Aisha radiallahu anha. So there's different ways, so many differences like this here. It's all in the sanad. And because of that, you can see that there is istirab in the sanad. Now he says, وَهُوَ يَقَعُ فِي الْإِسْنَادِ غَالِبًا, that most of the time when there's istirab, it always takes place in the sanad. وَقَدْ يَقَعُ فِي الْمَتْنِ, but there are the times when it takes place in the matn. So in the previous point, he first mentioned about when he was talking, not in the previous, when he was talking about maqlub, that he mentioned that first how it takes place in the sanad, and thereafter he mentions that وَقَدْ يَقَعُ الْقَلْبُ فِي الْمَتْنِ أَيْضًا. So he does the same here, but here he also very emphatically mentions that most of the time it happens in the sanad. Why is mentioning it emphatically here? From his text already, the way he's presenting it, you could have seen that it takes place. The reason why is because it's very, very rare, extremely seldom that it takes place in the text. So he brings the word to qad, which also, qad lit-taqalil, which also shows that how rare it takes place. So it takes place like very rare in the matan. Why? Because when it takes place in the matan, then most of the time it's going to be that there will be either first a weak narrator in the sanad, or there is going to be some way of giving tarjih to one of the narrations over the other narrations. So when it takes place in the matan, understand how it's taking place. Shaykh Wajiuddin Gujarati explains, وَيَقَعُ مِنْ رَاوٍ وَاحِدٍ. You have one rawi, so sometimes he's narrating it in one way, and at other times the text of it is narrating it in a different way. مُخَالِفٌ لَهُ. The meaning is changing totally. So sometimes it's saying something is permissible, and at other times it's saying that no, it's not permissible. So you can see. Or he says that maybe it's two different, so now you're going a link lower. That the students, some of them are narrating it in one way, which gives a different ruling, and or it changes the text in a particular way. وَبَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى وَجْهٍ آخَرٍ مُخَالِفٌ لَهُ. So these are the important words, because like we said, you can get riwayah bil ma'na. So Allama Munawi rahmallah gives an example here of the narration of Fatima bint Qais, that she was asked, she either asked Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, or Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was asked with regards to zakah. So Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam responded, Inna fil mali la haqqan siwa zakah. That besides zakah, there are also other rights in your wealth. So if you look at this here, what do you understand from this? That means you have to give your zakat your 2.5%. But besides that, you must either give additional charity, maybe there's some tax you have to pay. So there is more right. It's not only zakat you're going to be paying. You're going to be paying additional money above zakat. But then the same narration comes in Sunan ibn Majah, and there it comes, لَيْسَ فِي الْمَالِ حَقٌّ سِوَى الزَّكَاةِ. So now it has a completely different meaning. It means you only have to give your 2.5%. After that, you don't have to give anything else. So Mullah al-Qari quotes Alama Bayhaqi rahmallah is saying that فَهَذَا الْحَدِيث قَدْ طُرِبَ لَفْظُهُمْ وَمَعْنَاهُ. You can see the meaning also has been altered. The meaning also changes. And then Alama Bayhaqi said فَهَذَا الْإِضْطِرَابُ لَا يَحْتَمِلُ التَّأْوِيلِ. However, what happens when you find contradiction in the matan? Most of the times, already in the past we've done that how they would either try to see if they can combine the two narrations, or they would make see if one is nasikh and the other is mansukh. So here, Mullah al-Qari rahmallah is mentioning وقول البيهقي لا يحفظ لهذا اللفظ الثاني إسناد مردود بما رواه ابن ماجه هكذا. He says لكن قوله لا يحتمل تأويل فيه بحث. That when he's saying that you cannot interpret it, you cannot harmonize these two narrations, then he's saying that is not correct, because you can clearly say that there's no istirabiyah. The first narration is talking about what's voluntary for you to do, and the second is talking on what's compulsory. So it's only compulsory for you to give 2.5%. But after that, if you want to give 10% of your wealth, if you want to give 1/3 of your wealth in charity, then that's voluntary. So the one is talking about mustahab and the other is talking to wajib. So this is the point which we're trying to make. That the asal is that when a reliable narrator transmits something, then you cannot just dismiss it. So you try to and dismiss it because of our understanding. So therefore you will always try to make, and this is what in Qada al-Watr, كما أنه لا اضطراب إذا أمكن الجمع بين جانبي الاختلاف بحيث يمكن أن يعبر المتكلم بمجموع تلك الألفاظ عن معنى واحد، ويكون كل لفظ منها دالا على معنى غير معنى الذي دل عليه الآخر بحيث لا مناقضة. So this is what it's meaning, that whenever there was اضطراب in the matn, then scholars would try their best to see how they can harmonize all of it, and therefore it's very seldom. لكن قل أن يحكم المحدث على الحديث باضطراب بالنسبة إلى اختلاف في المتن دون الإسناد. إن شاء الله we'll continue from your answer until then. جزاكم الله خيرا. السلام عليكم.